Hello everyone, my name is Ea. I'm from Danita Fellowship Center at the Alumni Network team. On behalf of Danita Fellowship Center, I'm really happy to welcome you all to this Knowledge in Action talk, which will be about creating partnerships. Today is also International Women's Day, and to mark that day, I would really like you to write a name of a woman that you admire or you would like to work with, and then we can start this session today. Change happens when we stand together. So I'm sure that everyone knows the feeling of how great it feels when something comes together with people and in teams. And this feeling of how far you can get together and where you can use everyone's competencies and strengths. However, I think we can also recognize that it can sometimes be challenging and demanding, and sometimes it can feel like some of these internal processes is holding a project down. Our experience is, however, that if you work together, you can actually combat some of those challenges, and it can be avoided, this feeling of not getting anywhere. Today, we would like to give you some tips and tactics on how to build good partnerships. This we would like to do with the experiences from 3 amazing women who in their own field, communication, research, and civil society, have worked in a number of different partnerships. We hope that they will inspire you with their creativity and their ways of innovating successful partnerships. Today we are streaming live from Danita Fellowship Center's YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook pages. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please leave it in the chat so that everyone can see it, and then we will do our very best to address it. Now I would like to introduce you to our expert facilitator, Rowena Harding. She is a former journalist and a communication consultant. Some of you might recognize Rowena from her role as a lead facilitator in our engagement, influencing, and impact seminars, which we had last year. Today, we will also hear from 2 other very inspiring women, Harriet Gimbo, who is a program quality learning and impact advisor at ActionAid International, and then Jacqueline Golden, who is an associate professor of anthropology and water science in the Faculty of Natural Sciences at University of Western Cape, which is a position that is held under the Center of UNESCO Chair in Groundwater. That will be enough for me. Rowena, over to you.
Thank you, Ea, for that introduction, and hello everyone. It is fantastic to see so many people here today from Malawi to Mexico and every country in between that's interested in learning about partnership working. So I've been helping people communicate and engage for more than 20 years, and I've been really lucky that a lot of that has been in successful partnerships. Maybe some of the partnerships are a little bit familiar to you. For example, civil society organizations and political groups partnering to make change, and with the private sector working with emerging businesses to also grow and learn. But I've also worked with some different partnerships, such as a scientific printed traditional journal trying to partner with a tech company in the early days of the dot-com boom, and with TV celebrities partnering with schools and market stall traders, and researchers partnering with cultural institutions like museums, trying to explain complex issues around poverty. So we're going to hear today from 2 very different partnerships again. Now remember, if the partnership that you have in mind doesn't sound like these examples, don't worry, because we're also going to be talking about some of the general principles of good partnership working, which means that hopefully you'll all be able to take something away with you. So what do we mean when we talk about partnership working? So put simply, partnership working is a broad range of actions, and it can be defined as 2 or more groups coming together to work for a common purpose. It's not necessarily an equal division of power or financial responsibility, but there's always going to be some degree of sharing or control or influence. So why would you work in partnership. So this is where I would like you to join in. We hope that because you're here at this talk, you're interested in partnership working, but maybe you have to convince some other people that it's a really good thing to do as well. So let's think about some of the benefits of partnership working. And if you have your own benefits, reasons why you like to work in partnership, feel free to pop them into the chat as well. I'm going to start with my favorite reason for partnership working, and that's that it improves efficiency. You're sharing resources, it saves you effort, it saves you money, everybody likes that, and it can improve effectiveness. And your partners can do different things, maybe even do different things better than you can. So one group, for example, might have more rapport or credibility with an audience. Another great reason for partnership working is that when you unite over a common purpose, you get more attention and more momentum around the issue that you're working on. So remember, keep your ideas for partnership working coming into the chat. Some more ideas are that partnership working coordinates actions between different organizations, and it allows you to exchange ideas. You're going to have more possibilities to innovate. It'll strengthen your relationships. You'll be better informed. It empowers others, and it could possibly help you gain more funding, which everyone likes to. So it's important to know why you want to work in partnership. In fact, I'd say it's critical to success. You need to be honest. Do you just want somebody's financial support? Or do you want the credibility of their research? Are you partnering because you want their insight and their experience? By knowing your partnership goal and being clear about it, it's going to make it easier for you to choose the right partner. So if you're sold on partnership working, it can be a bit of a challenge to know who to work with. If you're totally overwhelmed with where to start, you can use a stakeholder mapping exercise to help you see all the different potential partners and their strengths. There are other exercises you can do, but we've chosen this one because it's short and simple for the purpose of today's talk. So in explaining it, I'm going to use the term stakeholder and partner interchangeably. And some of you may be familiar with the idea of stakeholder mapping. Maybe you've done it when you're identifying who is interested in a communications message or a policy you want to change. So put simply, it's a place for you to map out those organizations along the horizontal axis that have an interest in your work from low to high. And you'll also map out those who have an influence or power in your work, running top to bottom. And in doing so, you'll end up with 4 quadrants, like you can see on the screen, based on their influence and their interest. So once it's complete, it's going to look a little bit different like this. And you'll notice that the more detailed you can be, the better. So don't lump all government bodies into one quadrant or all NGOs into one quadrant. As you can see from the example here, they've actually identified some organizations by name. So remember, partnerships can be really diverse. I mentioned some examples, like anything from TV celebrities to museums. So feel free to list in the chat the type of organizations that you think could be potential partners. There could be, for example, government bodies. There could be politicians. What about big business? Civil society and NGOs are always great partners. There's academic institutes, educational facilities, funders and philanthropists also make good places to partner with. Faith organizations is another example too. So enough from me, because we are really lucky today for International Women's Day. We've got 2 fab women, and in very different ways, under very different circumstances, they've shown that partnerships, once they have all the ingredients right, you can really achieve things that you wouldn't have thought possible. So we're first going to hear from Harriet Gimbo, a reminder that she is the Program Quality Learning and Impact Advisor at ActionAid International. And Harriet spearheaded a campaign by the NGO ActionAid and diverse stakeholders. And the campaign set out to promote women's health and women's rights by ending violence against women and addressing HIV needs. So pretty huge ambition in that partnership. The campaign took place from 2007 to 2012, and it resulted in the creation of the Domestic Violence Act 2010 in Uganda. And this provides protection, response mechanisms, and guidelines for court processes for survivors of domestic violence. So Harriet, thank you for joining us today. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about what that means when I said that you got an act passed as part of your partnership? And tell us, why did ActionAid choose to work in partnership, and how on earth did you choose who to work with?
Thank you very much, Rowena. As Rowena has really stated, we worked with partners to pass what is called the Domestic Violence Act in Uganda. And an act of parliament is a law that is enacted in this case to support survivors of gender-based violence in the prevention and response of gender-based violence, particularly that has happened in a domestic setting. So it provides protection, it provides guidance for punishment of perpetrators, but also procedures and guidelines of what you need to do in the event of abuse, or guidelines that are given to courts in case somebody reports abuse to a court setting. So this is passed by PAM's law that the different stakeholders use in supporting survivors of gender-based violence in a domestic setting. So the reason why we work with partners is ActionAid. We believe that ActionAid is just one player in the field, and there are so many other people that could have competencies that we don't have as ActionAid, as well as capabilities. So one of those reasons is really complementarity. And this complementarity would mean sharing of resources, sharing of skills, sharing of knowledge, including expanding scope. It's so difficult as an entity to be operating in an entire country, but geographically you can be able to work with different people and reach different locations that you would require to go to. The other one is building voice and agency of people around an issue. And in this case, we were working around domestic violence. So it means that we work with different people and actors in this field, and there would be many different voices that come around this issue or speak about this issue beyond ActionAid. So collective action and collaboration becomes an important entry point around partnerships. The other one is credibility and legacy, that an issue becomes credible when there are more voices around it than when it is spoken to by an individual or a single entity. So in this case, we had ActionAid, we had the police, we had the ministries of gender and justice, as well as Ministry of Finance, we had the community, we had cultural and religious leaders. And so you see that it is an expanded spectrum that will bring different perspectives to this issue and definitely convince somebody to appreciate this. Then we feel it's also an inspiration for collective action. I would still emphasize collective action, because that again gives credibility and legitimacy, and as well as trust in the issue that we will be presenting as individuals. It also helps us open up new frontiers to reach out to audiences we wouldn't know as ActionAid. In this incidence, we were not very strongly, for example, deep into certain ministries, deep into certain departments of parliament. But that now helps us get into those spaces, because some partners are already familiar with those spaces. And so it makes it easy for us to get to those kind of spaces. So the other one is around spreading risk. Given that world over there is shrinking political space, partnerships are very strong in helping spreading as well as management of risks. So we come in with different strategies, different styles, different skills and knowledge on how risks are managed around partnerships that we will be taking as initiatives. So the other one is about how do we select partners. One is that we undergo a process that is an appraisal process, but most importantly, there must be shared vision, shared mission, and values around this partnership between ActionAid and all those parties. And in this case, our interest was that the Domestic Violence Act must be passed, and that people must have a law that governs domestic violence. That was the core goal that we had. So around the mission, vision, and values, it's really that brings us together. Then the other one is alignment with ActionAid strategy, meaning that when we look at our strategy and our interest around women rights and the work that we are doing, that strategic alignment brings us together, and therefore that is a partnership that we would pride in. The other one is value add. for all partnerships, we ensure that there is value addition to what ActionAid wants to do, but also that we add value on the other party of the partners. So mutual benefit, mutual accountability for the efforts that we want to take as individuals. Then the other one we would consider probably for formal entities is that they must have the right policies, they have the right procedures, for us to go into partnership, especially if we are going to go into a written memorandum of understanding, release resources would require certain basics in terms of systems, procedures, and processes. So otherwise, we also do consider informal partnerships, for example, social movements that are not registered, are not entities that would have an office or an executive director, as long as they have a transformative agenda. For example, in this particular case, we worked with the religious and cultural institutions. We worked with the community leaders that are not registered anywhere, but they have influence. The other one is that we undertake power analysis. I know Rowena spoke about stakeholder analysis, but it is important to understand the power dynamics around the different partners that you're going to work with. And so power analysis is very, very critical to determine who has the power to influence certain processes, who has the power to make certain decisions and bring them to the table. But we are also conscious that in the process of partnership, we ensure that we study who is with us and who is not with us. So we may even consider bringing in new partnerships as long as they are transformative and powerful enough to take forward. The other last one I can speak out is potential for us to learn from each other, to build knowledge together, and also influence processes beyond an idea. And in this case, if it was just the Domestic Violence Act, there are several things that we can do together beyond this partnership. So opportunity to work beyond an event, that is very important for us. So thanks, Rowena. I could get back to you.
Thank you very much, Harriet. There's some really fantastic practical examples there of things people should think about when they're trying to select and choose partners. Some good homework for everybody to go and take away as well, looking up influence mapping and power mapping as well. I also liked some of the ideas that you had for why you went into partnership working. And it sounds like there's quite a lot of humility involved in great partnership working, because you have to recognize that you don't have all the capabilities in your organization, or you don't have all the competencies, but together you can be much stronger. This idea of building voice and legacy is wonderful, because, partnership working can't be sustained forever. You might work as Harriet has on a campaign that's 5 years, that's quite long. You might have a limited amount of funding, but what's great is you build that voice and legacy that Harriet's talked about, that those other organizations you've worked with will be able to carry on long after that partnership's gone. And I think a really interesting idea about spreading and managing risk. So that's something to really think about as well, particularly those of you working in kind of civil society organizations, or the kind of world that we're living with now. Being able to manage risk collectively can be really important. So we're now going to hear from a researcher who had a very different reason for working in partnership. So a reminder for you, Jackie Golden is the Extraordinary Associate Professor of Water and Society at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. And her research project worked with residents of Limpopo in South Africa. They collected data and shared their rich knowledge of water and agriculture to inform future planning. So Jackie, we would love to hear from you. Why and how you decided to work with ordinary citizens, and how you identified which sections of the community you wanted to be working with.
Hi, Rowena. Lovely to be here, and hello to everybody who's there. I'll pick up on some of the points that Harriet made now previously, but just to say, why citizens? Well, Rowena, we're working in an area which is very remote and very poor. It's the Limpopo province of South Africa. It's one of the poorest provinces in the country. The roads are terrible. The distances are huge. And there's this huge hydrological void. In other words, there's a void where there's just not enough data on water. The Department of Water Affairs, who are the custodians of water in the country and who have got the biggest database on water, both surface water, that's water above the ground, and water under the ground, groundwater, are just simply, they cannot get to these very remote areas. So we worked with citizens, ordinary small-scale farmers, ordinary citizens who live right next to the wells. And we transferred skills like low cost technology, dip meters, very simple dip meters that get put into the wells to measure the water in the wells. And in that way, you're addressing this hydrological void. So in the beginning, we weren't quite sure who the partners were. We knew we had the Department of Water Affairs. You have to work with government. If you're working in an area, government is really one of the key players. So the Department of Water Affairs in the regional office, which is Polokwane, was a very important partner right from the start. They helped us identify small-scale farmers. They knew they had been working with some farmer groups, and it started sort of snowballing. One farmer said, but there's another farmer in another group. And we kind of worked like that. In the end, we ended up with 90 stakeholders. And from those 90 stakeholders, we selected our volunteers who were going to measure the data for us. So that's the one that the main driver was really the fact that there just was not, without partnering with small-scale farmers and citizens, we just would not be able to fill this hydrological void. So where to from here? We started working with small-scale farmers, and then let me just go back a few steps. I'm going back to the diagram that the very constructive diagram that Rowena had, showing the 4 quadrants. So what I want to say, and perhaps it's also my lens as an anthropologist, I work sort of very much on the grassroots and very much in a participatory way with people, is that the quadrants for us were messy. They were entangled. I really like the work of Ingold, and I suggest to you to look up Tim Ingold, his wonderful work on lines. And he talks about these meshworks, this entangled way that people work with each other. It's not in straight lines or little boxes. You can't say this person is here or this person is here, because this person is intermingled and is working with this person, but also with that person. And there are a lot of kind of lines and crossing and messiness. And this messiness in the field is part of building partnerships. So when we were working with our small-scale farmers, we started asking around, like, who are the important people in this area? We heard that one of the important players in the area were the commercial farmers. This was really difficult for us. It took us like at least a year to bring commercial farmers on board, because they've been measuring data for over 50 years, unlike the small-scale farmers. And they've got a huge database of information on the water in their boreholes, in their wells. So they were kind of thinking, what's in it for us? Like, we just a hassle factor. Like, why are we, the researchers from the University of the Western Cape, coming along, and why are we pairing with small-scale farmers? What's in it for them? But then when they saw that we were working to the betterment of the catchment, that whole area is called a catchment, a water management area. We were working to get better data, and we were partnering with the Department of Water Affairs. So we weren't kind of just going it alone. We were really kind of recognizing the players. They then said, okay, we'd really like to work with you. And they suggested that we work with their farm laborers, and that their farm laborers needed to come on board. So those became partners that we hadn't thought about at all. We'd thought about the commercial farmers, but certainly not their farm laborers. So those were our next partners. Then, of course, when you're talking to people who are working in those very remote areas, an extremely important player is your tribal authority. So they're the chiefs in the area who make a lot of decisions around land, around agriculture, around community problems, and they're not easy to access. You don't just go and tap on the door of a tribal authority and say, hey, can I talk to you about a project, or could you get involved? There are long protocols of getting in. They have their tribal authority meetings. You need to be invited to a meeting. You need to respect the protocol. And that was something that we learned. We didn't know. So we learned slowly. That's the other thing about partnerships. They are deeply collaborative, but they're slow. They're slow to build. It's something that I've learned really to respect, this, like the kind of the pace. It's not a couple of months. It's like more like a couple of years. We've been working in this area for 3 years. We started with funding from Dunedin, which was an ISCUSA project, funding through Dunedin and working with the University of Copenhagen. And after that, we were funded by the Water Research Commission. So Dunedin and the University of Copenhagen, of course, are partners. They were, in that case, donors, but they're also scientists with a huge amount of knowledge and teaching us things that we didn't know. And I hope vice versa, that we could be teaching things that perhaps they didn't know. Then, of course, the Water Research Commission, who are huge players when it comes to water in South Africa. They really promote research, and they are fantastic partners to have. And they establish each project has a reference group. So that's about 15 more people who are other scientists who are coming on board. So the challenge for many of us, for me, for instance, was I'm an anthropologist. As I've said before, my language is that of a social scientist. Now I had to learn to speak to engineers, to geologists, to hydrologists, to people who didn't at all have the same language or the same way of thinking as I did. And instead of sort of thinking we're not being understood, the onus then is on our shoulders to make ourselves understood, to make it clear why we're doing the work we're doing and why it is so important. Rowena, I think perhaps I'll leave it here for now, and we might have an opportunity a bit later to carry on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jackie. And yes, both you and Harriet have touched on some brilliant points, which we will go through as the course of this session continues and expand on a little bit more. I think you raised some really interesting stuff there. Patience and participation were two words I kept hearing. And you also said the need to get the government on board. And I think patience and participation is really required when engaging with that partner too. Thought it was a fabulous point about asking who. So never do, whether you're doing network mapping or stakeholder mapping or influence mapping, do not do this on your own. Ask other people, because you won't know all the answers and you won't know everybody that needs to be reached out to. So I think that is a great tip. And if you missed it, I think Jackie said it was Tim Ingold on networks. There's some suggested reading if you're interested in looking at that. So we have a little bit of time for questions now, I understand. So I'm going to pose the same question to the two of you. But we will go to Harriet first. You've both mentioned about, partnerships changing over time. So perhaps you started off thinking this is my list of partners, and then the project has gone on and you think this person needs to be a partner. I wonder, Harriet, could you talk to that a little bit? Like how, is there a science to identifying when you need to review your partners or bringing someone on board midway through? Anything that you'd like to contribute to that point?
Yes, Rowena, thanks. As I mentioned earlier, contexts change and circumstances change. And so you may require a partner that brings in a new skill, a new tactic or knowledge that you may not have as Action Aid. So it could be in incidents where you meet resistance, for example, and you require a partner that can help you to push back on that kind of reaction. It could be a partner that you require probably to profile the work that you're doing as Action Aid. That could be the media, but not every media is palatable at every point. So you need that person that has the right skill, that has the right knowledge. So you keep reviewing your partnerships probably monthly or based on the changes in the context or even risk that comes by, and you bring new partners on board. But it is also possible that you can drop some partners because they might come on board with positive thoughts and contributions, and on the way, because of their interests, mandate, and maybe selfishness at some point, they can become a problem in the partnerships. So it is also possible that you can drop partnerships. It's also possible that you can identify new partners. So going through reviews and checks all the time in terms of performance and achieving the things that you plan to do collaboratively is important. So that will determine when and how you change the kind of partnerships that you need, or even maintain certain kind of partnerships in an initiative. Over to you, Rowena.
Thank you very much for that. And Jackie, same question to you. Was there something that you wanted to expand on around partnerships changing over time and realizing that you had to bring new partners in?
Yes, Rowena, first of all, partnerships change over time, the roles of a particular partner changes. So the partner might not change, but the way that they're engaging with you will. Suddenly you realize that they've got a new skill that you didn't know about, or they recommend somebody that they're working with in a new project they weren't working with when you started. So, for instance, one of the roles that changed, we worked with government right from the start, as I've said, but one of the roles that changed is we didn't realize that the government officials would be so willing to help train our volunteers. And so that partnership changed. Instead of just being, kind of almost like at the political level, at a high level, and having them in meetings and being consultative, it became very hands-on. They came with us into the field, and they used their expertise to help us train. So that's just that's a typical example of how a particular partner doesn't change, but the role of that partner changes. Yeah, I think then also one doesn't always, sometimes the very obvious you haven't thought about, like a terribly obvious, for instance, like, the agricultural union. Why hadn't we thought about them? Suddenly you realize, your ears, you have to be alive all the time. You've got to be listening. You've got to be watching. And you've got to be open and wanting to open your doors and let people come in, is to say, well, this is a new partner, please, can you come in? And, almost apologetically that I'm sorry we didn't invite you many years ago, but thank goodness you're here now. So I hope that that answers a bit your question, Rowena,
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you, Jackie. And I think it's really good that Mia Cooper that you said, sorry we didn't get you in the beginning, but you're here now. So look, we've heard from both of you about how you chose your partners, which is great. We're next going to look at how do you get everybody on board and how do you strategize when you've got them all on board? So one of the key fundamentals of partnership working is building and maintaining trust. And we'll go back to Jackie and Harriet about some of their lessons learned about bringing people on board. But I thought we have a few minutes here to share a few tips on working in partnership and building trust. Now, those of you who have experience in the audience of building trust, of building relations and bringing partners on board, feel free to get in the chat and share your lessons learned. I'm going to kick us off with just 5 tips. So my first one has actually been touched on by both Jackie and Harriet, and it's being aware of the different dynamics within a partnership, depending on this status of the different organizations. So that's about power, it's about privilege, but it also can be about perceptions of power and privilege that you or others bring to the partnership. And you may have to think about how that power can be shared and the merits of each organization, each partner recognized, and also be aware of cultural differences as well. The next few tips are about agreeing. So agreeing the values and the vision. So we heard from Harriet specifically around, doing a kind of audit of the values of the organizations that are brought into partnership. So discussing what you all want from the partnership, what success looks like, and what the values are that will guide how you get there. You'll also want to agree your roles and responsibilities. So who's best placed to do what? So there isn't a duplication of effort. And also agreeing how to communicate. And not just your regular mode of communication, but how you'll communicate your feedback, how you will provide and accept feedback so you can learn from each other. And the final thing that you want to agree on is how you'll operate in a way that's transparent. So what details, what deadlines, what budgets, what decision-making or challenges need to be shared that is relevant to this partnership. So that's some theory of what makes a good partnership. Let's go back to Harriet and Jackie for how it works in reality. So Jackie, you have done a lot of work on trust. So we'd love to hear how you talked about all those different community members and farmers, how you got them on board, how you addressed if there's any skepticism. So I know you've touched on this, but how did you not just get them kind of participating, but really owning the project when you had such different perceived power structures? Over to you.
Yeah, trust is very dear to my heart. My doctoral thesis was on trust and transformation, and interestingly on shame. So the link between trust and shame is just sort of that link between building trust or not having trust. And just to say, by the way, that trust is something that takes a long time to build, but it breaks in a second. You can really break trust very, very quickly. So shame is when people are not feeling empowered. They're feeling lesser than. They're feeling perhaps humiliated because they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the voice to say things. So they either blush or they feel shame, they withdraw. And the other side of that is trust, is being open and having equal dynamics of power and leveling the playing fields so that you can trust each other and you can engage as equals, talking to each other. So trust, I think, is very linked to research integrity. For instance, let's just on a very kind of positivist note, talking about data, like hard data. The Department of Water Affairs in the beginning were rather skeptical about whether the data the small-scale farmers could get would be valid and would be verifiable. And we sent a scientist into the field every 3 weeks. Dr. Muchungami, Innocent, was absolutely fantastic. He went into the field and he went to the wells and he verified the measurements. And we saw that they were accurate. So we could build trust with the Department of Water Affairs when they saw that the data that's on the website, these graphs that we're producing from the small-scale farmers, is actually valid. It's verifiable. So they could trust not just the researchers ourselves and trust the interpersonal relationships between us, but trust the data. And I think that's really important to know that, there's always an error, there's always a margin of error. And whether it's a scientist at the top of the university or the dean of a faculty, he or she can make mistakes in the same way that a small-scale farmer can make mistakes. So no one is kind of protected from making mistakes. But when you see that the data is as scientific as it can possibly be, and that we really have put measures in place to verify and to bring something to the table that is worthy of the databases that are out there, that makes a huge, huge, huge difference. It's like the proof is in the pudding. I think I hope that answers your questions about trust, Rowena. I could go on and on and on about trust for a long time, but let's leave it there.
Thank you very much for that, Jackie. And yes, I have to confess, I found your work on trust fascinating. So do look it up if you're also interested in this as well. So I'd like to go to Harriet now. Harriet, you had many partners to bring on board. You had a diverse range of partners too. So how did you bring everyone around the table, so to speak, to strategize and to bring them on board with that sort of group? And do you have anything to say on how you sustained that partnership over a whole 5 years of your campaign?
Yes, definitely, Rowena, thanks. I will start that in all partnerships that we had, we ensured that we developed a joint vision at the start. Remember, we are all coming to this partnership with different mandates, with different interests, but the most important thing is to say what is the vision that we have collaboratively to achieve what we have said to advocate for, which in this case was the Domestic Violence Act. And so we also developed collective principles and values that will guide our partnerships, issues around being transparent, issues about having mutual respect, issues around being accountable for the roles and responsibilities that you will be given in this kind of partnerships. So issues of respecting our mandate. So we write all these things and put them in a document that we sign up to, meaning that we develop a code of conduct for this partnership that everybody needs to follow as we go through. And we accompany this by defining clear roles and responsibilities for every party. And that when we get a new partner on board, we equally define the roles and responsibilities of that partner so that each of us is accountable for these roles. So it means we have shared responsibility to deliver the initiative that we have in this partnership. That helps build trust as we move along. The other important thing is to respect each other's mandate and reasons for which we exist as entities. ActionAid could be a social justice organization, but you find that the media the interest is really in profiling and ensuring that information goes out there. So we respected each other's mandate. and ensure that we appreciate that we are all coming from different angles, but we have a goal to deliver collectively. So that mutual respect for each other's mandate also helps build, trust as we move along. The other one that we use frequently and is important for any partnership is to have equal, space, equal, utilization of our branding and visibility, to ensure that ActionAid is not too visible compared to all the other people. But how do we ensure that we do collective branding, collective visibility that presents the fact that we are all parties to this initiative? So that increasingly made people feel respected, feel wanted, and feel part of the collaborative agenda, and therefore build trust over time. The other one is communication, that we agreed on communication modalities and strategies, as well as frequency of communication and identification of the centers of communication in the different partnerships. Who will communicate in ActionAid, who will communicate to Parliament, so that is very, 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 very clear. And also choosing messengers across the partnerships and changing faces every now and then. It doesn't mean that when we have to speak about the partnership, it's always ActionAid. Somebody else could come on board. It could be a community-based organization, cultural institution. So that opportunity shows some kind of collaboration and gives that solidarity around trust. Then the other one is around joint planning, ensuring that everything we are going to do together at every point is planned collaboratively. So planning also brought us together. The other one is also monitoring power dynamics to ensure that we are not anybody comes to this partnership with is stronger than the other, to ensure that we are all having equity and equality in this partnership, and that over time, made us develop trust between each other and with each other. And over to you, Rowena.
Thanks very much, Harriet, and thank you, Jackie, too. It sounds like partnership working is a bit of a science and an art. There's a lot of scientific things you can do, planning, clarity, documentation, but then there's all those fabulous people skills and trust, relationship building, and patience as well. So I think, having just learned a fantastic lot of information, it's probably great to have a little bit of a break now. So over to you, Danita.
Thank you very much. So what a great start on today's session. We are just going to take 5 minutes break, so you can get yourself a cup of coffee or something else, and then we shall be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back to the second part of today's session. We will continue to hear from our three brilliant women, Rowena Harding, who is still taking us through the rest of the session today about partnerships, and with very interesting knowledge inputs from Harriet and Jacqueline. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So we just heard a little bit from Harriet and Jackie about how to build your partnerships and how to maintain them. And I really took away from that 3 Ps: planning, patience, and participation. So we're going to hear from them some more, but I just want to remind you, you can ask these guys anything you want. They have both referenced the challenges of partnership working, so maybe you have some questions around that. Feel free to ask away. We're going to have some time later on in this section to take questions from you in the audience. So this next bit, we're going to look at how you make use of the partnership to bring about the result that you want. These 2 case studies from Harriet and Jackie, they had really different goals. So Harriet's is a partnership for change. She had specific tactics for communications and advocacy. And Jackie's partnership goal was around research. So her tactics were about community engagement to help her bring about that research. So a tactic is essentially an activity that's designed to bring about a specific result, and that can be done in a range of really different ways. And we're going to hear some great examples from Jackie and Harriet in their specific examples of partnership working. But because all partnerships are so different, let's look at 3 very general tips to apply for any partnership tactics. So the first tip we've got is to know who is best for what, and then who can learn from who. So you need in a partnership to recognize that the strengths that each organization will have in deploying a tactic. A really good example of this took place in 2020 when Frans Timmermans, who's the European Commission's Executive Vice President and the Green Deal Chief, partnered with Greta Thunberg, the youth climate activist. One media organization summed it up as this: Greta and Frans both have something the other needs. Timmermans has executive power, Thunberg and her youth movement can sway public opinion. So together, they worked to change opinion on common agricultural policy. He with his position for lobbying, but she demonstrated that he had the support of a constituency. So the tip, know who is best for what. Our second tip, there's a saying that the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So our tip is learn, review, and revise. Just don't keep doing the same thing if it's getting mediocre results. And I'll give you an example of this. There's a telecommunications organization called Virgin Media, and it partnered with a national disability charity. Now, the partnership goal was to transform the lives of disabled people through digital technology. But the tactics that they were deploying, it wasn't reaching enough disabled people, so nobody felt like there was any transforming of lives going on. But through the partnership, they learned that employment was a really big issue for disabled people, really big around independence. And so Virgin Media brought their experience of the business world and the working world to address the barriers being faced by disabled people. And they could advise on adaptations and get more people into different workplaces, which really did result in more lives transformed and a more successful partnership. So that tip, learn, review, and revise. And our third tip is to respond to what's going on. So a good tactic delivers the right message to the right people at the right time via the right medium. And there are sometimes things outside of control of that simple little recipe, especially things happening at the right time. An example of this, in 2015, the campaigning organization Avaz were organizing a massive climate march on the streets of Paris in partnership with a huge coalition of artists, activists, and many other partners, and with a stakeholder in the Paris police. And this was going to take place in the COP climate summit being held there. A terrorist shooting took place days before the protests, and everything had to be cancelled for safety reasons. But the partnership agreed that something could still happen, that while the people couldn't be present in the street, their shoes could. And so they arranged within the guidelines of safety for all of the partners to collect thousands of pairs of shoes and the artists to present them artistically in the streets. And they actually generated a more unique and positive photo for the media, generating huge impact. And in addition, those partners were able to reach out to their contacts, celebrities, partners of their own, who wouldn't have ordinarily taken place in, say, a protest march, but were happy to donate a pair of shoes. Even the Pope donated a pair of shoes for the photo. So the tip then, respond to what's going on. So I'd like now to hear about some of the tactics from our speakers. Harriet, I'd like to go to you first. So I know you had some wonderful tactics in your campaign, from creating women's shelters to media work. Can you tell us about some of the tactics that you deployed in your campaign, please, in your partnership?
Thank you so much, Rowena, about that. Oh, yes, tactics are very important, definitely, for sustaining any action that you're doing in a partnership. So, your submissions, the issue around joint messaging, that for all the messages that we were presenting, we ensure that we all collaboratively develop this message, but most importantly, choose a good and right messenger to deliver this message. For example, if we had to go to communities to speak about negative cultural practices, it becomes a bit easier for you to identify a very influential cultural leader or a religious leader to speak to the people. They will definitely listen because they will know this person is speaking about something they need to change. So we had incidences where we had to undertake a process of mapping of negative cultural practices, issues like forced widow inheritance, issues like early marriages, issues like refund of bride price. And it's so difficult for a stranger to come and speak about these issues, but a cultural leader would, and people would listen. So the right messaging and the right messenger is a very important tactic. The other one is having credible information, in that if you present this to the different actors, nobody should really, it should be disputed that a person really looks at this information and is like, yes, it is true, this issue is happening and this is happening to the women and we must act. But the other tactic we added was that we bring the people to speak about the experiences they are living. So it's not action aid speaking, it's not the ministry speaking, but a woman that has been abused in a domestic setting. How does she become the center and the primary interest of this advocacy? So they were part of us and could easily speak about what has happened around them. So people believed and acted on the impact and the stories that were mentioned by the survivors of gender-based violence. I will also emphasize the issue of understanding who has what strength. In that we do undertake at the point of identifying partners. And we say if there is influence in parliament, then we must, for example, use the Women's Parliamentary Association to speak. If we are going to the ministries, who is capable of influencing the ministries? If we are going to the communities, so the people that had the strength are the people that we put at the forefront, and then we give a backup. Joint branding is the other, for people to appreciate that it is not just a voice of an individual entity, but a voice of several people that are presenting an issue. So that is very, very important. Reviewing partnerships is very important, that we are not just chasing the initiative that we are doing, but we have 2 steps back and say, are we doing very well, or what do we need to do differently? That itself is very, very motivating and brings people more on board to realize that we actually need to change certain tactics and certain strategies as we move along in this kind of partnership. The other one is really celebrating the achievements that we have, either process achievements or any small change would help us, rejuvenate people and get people to come back to the realities and the action that we wanted to take up as individuals. So that is what I would share now for the question that you asked, Rowena.
Thank you very much, Harriet. I love that point about the right messenger as well. And I hope you guys are taking notes on this, because I am learning so much from today's speakers. Don't forget that you can also ask them questions, particularly if you've got something that is really relevant from your own partnership. Don't be afraid to ask for it. So we're now going to go to Jackie. You have some really fascinating tactics to share with us, Jackie, because you wanted to ensure that everyone was engaged and everybody could be involved in your research. So I'd like to give the floor to you now to talk about some of the tactics you use, please.
Thanks, Rowena. Yeah, for us, things don't just happen. You know, the partners it's hard work and it takes time, but it takes, as you say, tactics and strategies. So perhaps, Jacob, if I can ask you to put up a couple of slides. This first slide it's one of the tactics we use. We have these what we call our participatory toolkit. And the Knowledge Cafe is one of the tools. You can't hear here, but this is a table they've been given a problem to solve. The problem was there's a cow that is walking through the stream and dirting the stream. Solve the problem. So each table is given tokens. For instance, a consultant would be 1,000 points. A fence might be 10 points. Some chickens might be 25 points. They have all these tokens, and with the tokens that they're given on their table, they have to solve the problem. This is called a Knowledge Cafe. It's a game that we introduced, we kind of made, and we believe like this mix between science and art that Rowena was talking about. Perhaps the next slide, which shows the river of life. This, again, is a tactic that we use. In this case, when we had our 90 people at the stakeholder workshops, in the 3 different workshops, 30 people together, we had big pieces of paper on the floor with crayons and color, and we asked everyone to draw for us their river of life. This is a way of getting people who perhaps they're shy, or they don't really always have the voice or the sort of ability to say, hey guys, here I am, I'm a partner with you, to draw and to express themselves in this it's an introspective river of life. Like which parts of the river, where were there boulders that were big and the river couldn't pass? Where was the river dry? Where did the river have new bends? Perhaps someone started a new job. Perhaps somebody got married. The different sort of stages and events that happen in somebody's life that anchors them and perhaps changes the course of their life. So the river of life is a really powerful tool that we use, and we use it as one of these participatory tactics to get people to feel that they're on an equal footing. I mean, here you get an official of the Department of Water Affairs on the floor alongside a small-scale farmer. It really is a wonderful way to level the playing fields. The next slide is also, it shows, instead of having a dry report from a workshop, we have graphic facilitation where we capture the voices of people and we put it into this graphic storyboard representation. It's a tactic to engage people, and people can see their words are on these boards, and they're not just a report that's in a library or in an academic on a bookshelf. So this storyboard is a powerful, again, a tool, a tactic to involve people, to say, look, we're listening to you. We've got the words that you tell us are important. Here they are reflected on the storyboard. And the last one shows you can't see it too well here, but it's monitoring whether our partnerships are doing the right thing. So here along the left-hand side, you would say, was the technology that I was employing, was I able to understand it? And you put a smiley, yes or no, or a frown. So you're using emoticons to evaluate different aspects of your work. Was I able to communicate my ideas to the Department of Water Affairs, yes or no? A smiley or a frown. So these are ways, again, they're interactive ways. It's part of a participatory toolkit. It's part of a way of getting people themselves, the people that we're working with, to tell us their story in a way that is alive and vivid and participatory. So I think that's really important. Then also, tactics, strange tactics. We didn't think of everything. We were nominated to go to Berlin to present our project at the Berlin Science Week at the Falling Walls Engage. And that was fantastic. I mean, what a tactic to get Limpopo, to get these little farming areas on a global stage. And people were really excited that their photographs and, they were represented in Berlin. And that helped motivate, that helped sustain partnerships, because people feel they're part of a bigger story. That wasn't something that we could have planned. That happened. Another tactic is also, to listen and give an opportunity to people. One of our farmers said she wants to now tell the story. She wants to be sitting in her home, and she wants to be the person to tell us her story. I mean, that was just such a wonderful moment of acknowledgement that somebody who had been very, very quiet felt empowered and wanted to talk to us and wanted to be the vehicle through which a story of change, a story about what it meant to be monitoring water in these remote rural areas, what it meant to be part of a bigger group, not just always themselves alone in these little villages, but really connected to the Department of Water Affairs, connected to other farmers, connected to the farm laborers, connected to the tribal chiefs, all through the activity of monitoring groundwater in these remote wells. I hope that gives you some sort of idea, Rowena, of tactics that we think are really important as tools to help us make these partnerships sort of more durable.
Fantastic. Those are such great examples, and I think that the pictures really brought them to life for everyone. Again, if you do have any questions for Jackie or Harriet on their tactics or anything else, then do ask. I have a few questions to ask for them. So both Jackie and Harriet, I work a lot with researchers, as you know, and we may have some researchers here in the audience, and they love a good kickoff inception meeting. And now I feel that they come with their own challenges. I wonder if you have anything to say, Harriet, the kickoff inception meeting, bringing everybody around a table all at the one time, is it successful? Does it work? Or is it just really too ambitious of something to try?
Yes, Rowena. Of course, partnerships do not go without challenges. One of the critical challenges as you try to bring people together they come with different mandates, different expectations, different aspirations of partnerships. Some come with an expectation of getting resources, and yet that probably is not even one of those goals that we would have for this partnership. So as you try to put these partnerships together, there are people who you will contact and they don't want to come on board because they are not clear whether their mandate would actually be, respected, or whether they would actually benefit or get resources. So the high expectations, the diversity of mandates that we have is a very, very big problem. The other one is that most organizations, I would give an example like in Uganda here, for very formal organizations, they also have a challenge with founder syndrome, if I might put it that way. So they always want to see specific individuals speak. So when you want to say, can we have the people that are benefiting from this program to talk, they would probably want to always see the executive director. So changing faces of people who speak, messaging and all that becomes very difficult because they would want to front the same faces all the time. And yet the problem is really broad and would involve so many people speaking about an item. The other one that I can bring is that there are organizations that come when they are not clear about what they are bringing to the table. I spoke about mutual benefit and mutual, collaboration. But the question will be, what are you bringing to the table? And then they will have to go and consult. So the issue of decision making, they may come with very little information for them to make decisions, and that delays some of what we would want to do. Then in these partnerships, there are some people that would want to be in the background, but they still remain grumbling. They don't want to be seen to speak. They don't want to be seen to contribute. So you would want to respect that. But there could be people who really want everybody to speak and everybody to be at the front line. So the difficulty again with the mandate and getting people to understand what they are supposed to do is also the other bigger challenge as you put these partnerships together. Finally, I would speak about the difficulty at the start in determining commitment. So people may come to partnerships but look very, very committed. When you're trying to put them on board, there are those that would be doubting. So it's difficult to tell who is on spot ready to move with you, especially if it is a quick action that you need to take and time is a constraint. You need somebody to come on board and ready to speak and ready to take action. So some people pull back, and it is difficult for you to bring them back because they are not very transparent on the reasons why they don't want to come and the reasons why they don't want to act. So that makes it difficult as you try to put partnerships together on the different initiatives that you may undertake. That's what I hear for now, Rowena. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Harriet. So, Jackie, I just want to check in with you because I can see that Anna in the audience is also asking the same question. So it sounds like you guys had individual meetings with your partners, but did you then get everybody all together and invite them all together? So if I can get Jackie just to respond to that.
Rowena, I think the starting point, the first people that we contacted individually with the Department of Water Affairs. There's no ways we could have called a meeting, without first them knowing that we're going to be calling a meeting and who we were going to ask. However, there's different ways of doing things. What we found in our initial meetings is if you make people feel important, so it's not just, me and the other researchers at the university or Danita standing up and talking, but you give the welcome, the opening welcome, which is quite, often something which is an honorable position to have in a workshop. You give it to somebody, you give it to the Department of Water Affairs, and you invite key players to present. Sometimes their presentations are actually completely off track. You don't know why they're presenting or what they're presenting, but it doesn't matter. You're giving them voice, you're giving them a space that they at the workshop can see their names are on the program, and they then become co-owners. They're not just passive, but they're more actively involved. So that, maybe it's I don't like to use the word manipulative because it's got such a negative aspect to it, but it is slightly manipulative, like you kind of getting people to feel that they're important. But I think it's hit and miss. Like in the inception meeting, a lot of people are there and they don't really know why they're there. And there's a lot of kind of, just caution, like, what's all this about? But that's where I find these tactics that we use, and we use them very early on, the tactics of the river of life, doing a knowledge cafe, just bringing people together. So what you're doing is people are just talking to each other without really knowing what the purpose is that they're there at the meeting for, but rather that they're learning to just see other faces, hear other voices. I really like Anna's question, whether you started with individuals. And I would say overall, apart from the odd, the department, the government, bringing government officials, we try to avoid speaking to people on their own. Now that we know people, we are approaching them more on their own. Like when I go to Limpopo next week, I'm going to go and have lunch with the commercial farmer. He's invited me to his farm. We kind of establish more one-on-one, like I said, like the one Dora has said, please, can I tell a story? And she wants to be a spokeswoman in her own right, rather than just a participant in a workshop. So, those things have developed over time. We didn't expect them. They're surprises. They're part of these kind of puzzling surprises that happen in the field. So I think, that's why it's slow, and you need these deeply collaborative efforts, this sort of slow science, because the first meeting is often just a hit and miss. It's really kind of bumbling around in the dark. Who's here? What they're here for? Everyone's asking that question. Why am I here? What's this about? But as they build more confidence in the project and they see that this is going somewhere, that this is important, that you're really listening to them, that you can give them something. In our case, it was giving them data, which is always, it's valuable, but that they were giving us really important things as well. So by the second meeting, things change. So I think these meetings they're almost like painting, like a canvas. In the beginning, your canvas is blank and you put a few little brush strokes on it, and then over time, the canvas takes a shape and a life of its own. And often the artist didn't really know where it was going to be going in the beginning.
Fabulous, thank you. And it sounds so fluid, partnership working, as we mentioned earlier. There's this real ebb and flow of the relationship and the handing over of power and the letting go and letting people become a spokesperson. It's fantastic that we're hearing from you both. We have just time for a very, very quick question. I'm going to pose it to Harriet. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, Harriet, with a big one, but I'd like to talk about lessons learned and challenges. So what, over the course of 5 years, what was the thing that surprised you? What was the biggest lesson that you learned that you can share with us at the moment?
Rowena, I would go back to the big discussion around building trust. It's important to build trust in a partnership because short of trust, everybody will go their own direction and it becomes very difficult to achieve the goal that you set for that partnership. So building trust and investing as much time, as much strategy, as much resources, as tactics to really ensure that you build trust in the process of having a specific partnership. The other one is understanding objectives and interests of partners. That is very, very, very critical. If you don't do that at the start, it becomes difficult as you grow and progress in the partnership for people to appreciate why they are in this partnership. So understand their objectives, understand their interests to be able to be on the same page as you move with this partnership. The other one that we shouldn't underrate is power dynamics. There are lots of power dynamics in partnerships, and these change as we progress. They change with context, they change with new interests. There could be old interests, but new interests also emerge as partnerships happen. So power dynamics for me was a very, very big lesson. Given that we were talking about an item that involves government, an item that involves members of parliament, but strongly entrenched into culture and religion. So it becomes difficult for you to break through if you don't get to understand power dynamics and who can help you to influence or have influence in the different spaces that you will go to. The other one I can share is around mutual respect. That is very, very important because circumstances can change as partnerships go on. Circumstances change. So how do you respect those changes? And most importantly, be flexible and adaptable as things change. So flexibility, agility, and adaptability for me are very, very important lessons that I learned, that for every partnerships that you have, appreciate that things may change and that you may require to be flexible to be able to adapt to those circumstances that come with these partnerships. The other one is to appreciate that people can come with different expectations, different interests, and so see how to manage those as much as possible. And finally, monitoring risk and managing risk. In coming together, we come with different interests, with different mandates, with different messaging, with different backgrounds as institutions, but also as individuals. And that comes with risk. So how do you manage risk right from the start and ensure that that is on your radar for monitoring and management, and ensure that that is minimized and mitigated as much as possible as you progress with any form of partnership. So that's what I can share quickly, Rowena.
Thanks very much. Packed full of really, really useful information as usual, Harriet. So let's move on to our final section now. How do you know a partnership is successful? So say we've been doing all of these things that Harriet and Jackie have taught us. How do we know we're doing the right thing? Well, those of you with experience in the audience, please feel free to share your tips. I'm just going to run through a couple of things that I'm thinking of, and then we're going to hear from Harriet and Jackie again. So Listening, learning to listen, listening to learn, I think is a really important thing. Your partner or partners, they're going to see things in your organization that you may not see. Maybe you're too close to things. Maybe they have a different perspective. So learning to listen, listening to learn is a good way to find out if your partnership is successful. Also, making sure you've got really different ways to feed back. So we saw Jackie's great example of the smiley face and the frowny face, which I think is brilliant. But make sure everyone feels okay feeding back. Make sure there are different ways to feed back. So think about that power and perception again in your partnership. Are there options to feedback anonymously or through trusted individuals? Can feedback be given verbal, written, or through smiley faces or whatever makes people feel uncomfortable? So we're going to turn now to Harriet. We would like to hear from you. How did you measure the success of your partnerships?
Thanks, Rowena. So before I share how we measured the success of our partnerships, I want to emphasize the fact that for all partnerships, we must ensure that right at the start, we agree on our indicators of success. What will success look like for us in this partnership? And we document that and attach roles and responsibilities to it, as well as accountability mechanisms. So how would we know that change is happening? One is where people are accountable for what they were supposed to do, that they are delivering it and accounting back to the main forum that we may have as partners. So again, that will depend on the indicators that we set and the roles and responsibilities that we have shared across the partnerships. The other one is regular check-ins and reviews. We check on each other and have reviews and communicate with each other as frequently as possible. So that we see whether we are actually making progress in the right direction. So in ActionAid, we use a methodology that is called participatory reviews and reflections. And these help us look at what is working well, what is not working well. Are there any opportunities we can exploit? Are there opportunities we have missed? So using those questions to review our partnership is very, very important. Then the other one, we try so much to differentiate between attribution and contribution. Because we are just a few players in this field, we must be clear on the contribution that we are making. And one of those that we could measure around is to see probably commitment from the local government. They say we will now give resources for shelters. And we see that now, yes, we are making progress. There are those that will come and say we will give technical support. The police will say we will undertake investigations. So those kind of commitments show that we are actually making progress and moving in the right direction. The other one is where we do joint documentation and sharing of information that we have got together, stories of change, case studies that are showing that we are actually making progress, especially when we hear the voices of the people that we anticipated to change by this Domestic Violence Act. That could be women, they could be girls, they could be children, they could be even men that are giving testimonies from this household. They indicate that the law is actually being put to use. Or institutions, for example, before this Domestic Violence Act was passed, police did not have a tool that they would use for dealing with perpetrators. Courts did not have documents that they are using. But when we see them making reference to articles in the Domestic Violence Act, making reference to the cases that they are handling, and using this act to actually deal with them, that brings joy to us, and we felt really change is happening in the communities and that people are actually benefiting from the act that we actually talked about in Parliament. The other one is where staff and partners have developed capacity to even utilize that act and be able to speak, for example, about this act. It shows you that people have understood its importance and are actually making use of the act in the work that they are doing. Rowena, for me, so those are the examples that I can give for now.
Thank you again, Harriet. If you haven't written a book about partnership working yet, Harriet, I think you should write one. That's what I suggest. It's just great what you're sharing with us. So now I want to hear from Jackie. Jackie, you had different kinds of partnerships. You had like the people, the citizens. You had the water authority, the sort of more formal partnerships. So how did you know that there was success amongst those partnerships? What measures did you use?
I think part of the success story for us has been the proactive engagement of our partners. For instance, the Department of Water Affairs, who will pick up the phone and phone us and say, hey guys, when are you coming back to Polokwane? You know, it's not like us saying, oh, we're coming to Polokwane, may we see you? It's, hey guys, when are you coming back to Polokwane? You know, that shows that they are watching this space. They are interested. Just interesting kind of shift, perhaps going back to a few minutes ago to our discussion on tactics, but also to see how successful things are. You know, we had with COVID, things changed dramatically. We could no longer have these big meetings with lots of stakeholders in the room where there's a lot of dialogue and discussion going on. So the success that we know that the project is successful because people are still engaged. They still wanted Dr. Muchingami to go to the field and to test whether their data was good. So they still, despite COVID, despite the changes with masks and all, they still want to be measuring. And it's coming from the bottom up for the first time, not from us saying, look, we need these measures, we need this data, it's here. I've got this data, won't you come and check that it's good. So those are successes for us. The other big success, and that's sort of, I suppose, the easiest because it's science, it's measurable, is that the database is the website is active. The graphs are being loaded weekly, on a weekly basis, onto the database. People are putting their photographs. We've got a WhatsApp, and people are chatting to each other. Saying, you know, kind of, oh, it rained here yesterday, look at this, and showing you a picture of a rain gauge with water, and just sharing things, whatever they might be, on the app. And that's happening sort of almost out of our hands, you know. So it's people are actively engaging from having been really passive. They now are becoming active, actively empowered in making decisions around water and understanding water issues in the area. That's huge.
Fabulous, Jackie. Thank you so much for those great insights. And it sounds like you have some real successes there around stories of change. You know, what we're hearing is that engagement is a success in itself. So people aren't going to automatically want to engage with you. We've heard that right from the beginning. Maybe they'll come for your first meeting, maybe because there's free snacks. They might not engage. And it's that kind of shift in attitude and that shift in working that you want to monitor. So if we think about Harriet's example, some politicians may not even have gender issues on their agenda. And so even to be listened to or invited to a meeting is a real success. And that example that Jackie gave about the water authority saying, when are you coming? That's a real success. So don't just think that in these examples, for example, that Harriet's only measure of success is getting the act and Jackie's is getting the data and the research. You really want to measure these incremental changes, these micro impacts, and where there are compelling stories to be told. So our final tips for you guys are to really make a note of the people you engage with, the doors that might have been closed that are now open, the attitudes and the behaviors that you have observed. And you can just keep asking questions like, what did you learn from today's meeting? What information did you gain that you can act on? What did they think of the activities that they did with you? What do they know about this issue before? What do they do now? And what are they going to do differently because of this partnership? And it's really important to write this stuff down. There is plenty of free software, Evernote, Google Docs, Trello, Slack. Your team can all note down these little micro impacts, these little observations from meetings, these quotes from partnerships that have been observed in the field. Because if you don't, you're going to miss out on those stories of impact that are taking place right before your eyes. So I want to bring our two wonderful women onto the screen today as we head towards the end. And I would like to ask you both, and let's go to Harriet first. Would it have been possible to have achieved everything that you achieved if ActionAid did it alone? Harriet?
Definitely very difficult, Rowena. There is no one individual that can succeed on doing something as an individual, because we are not an island of knowledge. And so depending on others in terms of skill, knowledge, resources, as you share your own, is a very important aspect and the strength that comes with partnership. That cannot happen. And so as Action Aid, I mean, we couldn't do this without the cultural institution. We couldn't do that without Parliament, because Parliament has, for example, the mandate to write out this act and pass it through. But we cannot do that as Action Aid. So partnerships are very important. That cannot happen that we do that individually. So I would still resound the fact that partnerships are a very good approach of delivering some of the change initiatives that we want to do as civil society organizations, as governments, as private sector, or any entity. We cannot work alone.
And Jackie, the same question to you, could you have just rounded up a bunch of scientists in the field, or, could you have achieved what you wanted to achieve without your partners?
Absolutely impossible. Absolutely impossible. We rely imagine if we hadn't involved the tribal authorities, our project would fail. Imagine if we hadn't involved the Department of Water Affairs at a very early stage, our project would not have the impact it has. If we'd not involved the commercial farmers, we decided to just go for the small scale farmers, we would have created hostility. So not only would it not survive, but we could have created really, quite sort of a flamboyant negative environment. Partnerships are absolutely essential. I mean, I'm so thrilled that you've brought this talk, Rowena, today, because I think it's just made it even more clear listening to you, listening to Harriet, looking at some of the questions coming from the floor, just what an important topic this is. And I think we don't give it enough focus, and we don't look at the nuances in partnerships. We just talk about partnerships, but we don't understand these dynamics, and I think we need to and take it a lot more seriously.
Thank you very much. And it's been a wonderful partnership. It looks like there's 3 of us at the moment, but actually it's a much bigger partnership today. So I'd like to say thank you to Danita, and over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for the wonderful inputs, and thank you, Rowena, for facilitating the day for us, and Harriet and Jackie for the inputs. I also just wanted to thank everyone who has engaged in this session today. If we have not answered your questions, or if you have any other burning questions, please feel free to write an email to ee@dfcenter.dk. Our next Knowledge in Action talk will be announced soon on our social media platforms, so please stay tuned, and we're looking forward to seeing you for the next Knowledge in Action talk. Thank you very much, and goodbye.